Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Cup of Jonah. I hope you all had a lovely weekend. So, by way of reminder, the last few weeks, we started talking about, what wisdom, what is this, and why is it important? And how does that influence the order of this book and the topics we'll discuss? From then, we discussed whether or not God exists. That was a major part of last week, was us going through, it actually took us 3 days to get through that chapter 13 there, on the different ways that we can establish from reason how we know that God exists. So today, before we get into some more of the qualities and the things we can know about God, we're going to talk about how important it is to understand what we're saying and what we're not saying. So we're going to talk about how we use words and how we know God. And he calls it by the way of remotion. And I'll explain that. But I appreciate you guys being here this morning. I hope you have a nice, good cup of Jonah to accompany us. Without further ado, that to know God, we must use the way of remotion. We have shown that there exists a first being, whom we call God. We must accordingly now investigate the properties of this being. Now, in considering the divine substance, we should especially make use of the method of remotion. For by its immensity, the divine substance surpasses every form that our intellect reaches. Thus, we are unable to apprehend it by knowing what it is. Yet we are able to have some knowledge of it by knowing what it is not. Furthermore, we approach nearer to a knowledge of God according as through our intellect we are able to remove more and more things from him. For we know each thing more perfectly, the more fully we see its differences from other things. For each thing has within itself its own being, distinct from all other things. So too in the case of the things whose definitions we know. We locate them in a genus, through which we know in a general way what they are. Then we add differences to each thing, by which we make it distinguished from other things. In this way, a complete knowledge of a substance is built up. Side note, as an example, we call the definition of man, our species, is rational animal. Rational is something that sets us apart. Other animals don't have the use of reason in the way that we do. They have what simulates reason, which we can get into this another point, but it's very interesting. It's the ability to sense in a way long-term effects of things. It's called the cogitative power or the cogitative sense, but it's actually it seems like it's intellectual, but it's not. It's that sense we call instinct, which leads, for example, a squirrel to bury nuts as winter approaches so that it can go find them, right? Very interesting. But this cogitative power sometimes seems like reason. However, in the consideration of the divine substance, we cannot take what as a genus, nor can we derive the distinction of God from things by differences affirmed of God. For this reason, we must derive the distinction of God from other beings by means of negative differences. And just as affirmative differences, one contract the other, so one negative difference is contracted by another that make it to differ from many beings. For example, if we say that God is not an accident, we thereby distinguish him from all accidents. And that the word accident there means that thing which is outside of the substance of a thing. So we don't mean outside of the intention in that way. He's talking about in the order of being. So, for example, bearded or musical or whiteness those are accidents of Jonah. I use whiteness and musical a lot because those are the examples he used in the book. I'm trying to keep it consistent for those wondering. Then if we add that he is not a body, we shall further distinguish him from certain substances. And thus, proceeding in order, by such negations, God will be distinguished from all that he is not. Finally, there will then be a proper consideration of God's substance when he will be known as distinct from all things. Yet this knowledge will not be perfect, since it will not tell us what God is in himself. As a principle of procedure in knowing God by way of remotion, therefore, let us adopt the proposition which, from what we have said, is now manifest, namely, that God is absolutely unmoved. The authority of sacred scripture also confirms this, for it is written, quote, I am the Lord and I change not. Or again, quote, with whom there is no change. Or again, God is not man that he should be changed. So what's beautiful here, you'll see, obviously, Thomas was a Christian. He was a Catholic, right? In his day, there were no what we call Protestants today. Everybody was Catholic. There was the Eastern Catholic Church. I mean, and then there was at his time in the 1400s, there's also the Orthodox Church. So it wasn't. There were still those who claimed to be, who recognized Scripture but weren't part of the church. Fine. But my point in bringing that up at the moment is, since we're starting from reason in this book, as we've discussed many times, because that's what we all have in common, he's also going to, you'll see this again and again, he's also going to reference Scripture at the end, basically saying, oh, yeah, this is actually told to us as well. So we got there by reason, we understood it by reason, but, it was in the book too, right? Which is cool because he's trying to show, even in some of the more simple things like God is unmoved, absolutely unmoved. We see that multiple times in Scripture, and I'm sure there's dozens of other examples that he could have given here. But the coming chapter, so the reason why he said unmoved, because remember, that was actually the whole argument of last week, is that must be some unmoved mover, and that whatever that is, we're going to call God. So here he says something similar. He's like, okay, so just like as a recap, he's like, so we've already established that he's absolutely unmoved. Has to be. By deduction, we've figured this out, right? The coming chapters are going to be pretty cool. Again, always parting from reason and rational discourse. The next questions that he's going to ask, that is God eternal? Meaning without the constraints of time, right? Is that that there is no passive potency, so he's not potency. No, there is no matter in God. There's no composition in God. He's completely, not composed of matter and form like we are. Anyways, and it goes on. But that's just a little teaser trailer of things to come. But it's beautiful, actually. So he references this idea of remotion is really important, because if we can't tell things exactly of God, because we can't perceive him, and if you think about it, it makes perfect sense, right? If this creator of all things, this unmoved mover, if I could apprehend him and comprehend him, then how great would he be? If my little brain, I can't even comprehend the movements of the stars and why exactly they are the way they are. So how could I possibly be self-deceived enough to actually understand? It's pretty arrogant, right? To think that you could possibly understand actually truly God in himself. So It's a good reminder also that as we embark on these lofty considerations of what is God, that it's more true to say what he is not than to say what he is. It's more true, I think it's St. Anselm who said, it's more true to say that God does not exist than to say that he exists. Because all we know, all we've ever had contact with, all we can comprehend is created existence. And whatever that first cause, the way that first cause, that unmoved mover exists, is something very different than our created existence in time. But that's what we know. So it's more true to say, in that sense, that God doesn't exist than to say that he does. But again, we want to be able to have a discourse about this unmoved mover and try to understand what we can and deduce what we can about him. But we have to do so humbly and carefully and make sure that we understand what we're saying and what we're not saying. And how, what's interesting though is it's not as limited as people think. Curious as well, this idea of the cogitative sense. How often do we as men, and by men I mean rational animal, ladies, I'm including you, how often as men do we think we're thinking or reasoning, and how often is it just a cogitative sense? How often do we actually employ the intellect? Here at Cup of Jonah, we do every morning. But you know, it's a good question to ask. How often am I actually reasoning and rationally deducing or inducing or thinking or analyzing, right? It's true. He exists in everything around us. Most don't look, and that's disheartening. It's true. And you know, Dead Game, that's exactly why podcasts like, not just Cup of Jonah, but everything that the guys and gals at Phone Booth do, and there's a lot of other podcasts out in the world that do this as well, that look for truth and the divine, even if they don't call it that oftentimes, just by searching for the truth sincerely in the things around us and in life. That's in a way seeking God as well. That's one of the things I respect so much about Ted and the guys, is that there is that thirst for truth, you know? So yeah, no, it's beautiful. And it's so important, Dead Game. You're right. And this is how we help change that. You know, they say good times make weak men make bad times make good times, and the cycle repeats, right? So the little that we can do by spending time together, thinking about things of God, searching out God, seeing what we can find of him in the things around us, pursuing honestly, sincerely, and humbly. That's the tough part. The truth. It's easy to overstate what we know about God. Sometimes what we think we know about God is more from our desires of what we would like or what we're comfortable with. Sometimes it's a challenge to look honestly and humbly at what we do and what we do not know about God. So it's going to be a wonderful journey. It already has been, and will continue to be a wonderful journey through this book, that continues to, it will challenge us throughout with different things. What's neat though is in a couple weeks you'll see, when we start to talk about God's existence and his being and how they're the same. And this is another thing, that one of my favorite verses in scripture. So I may have mentioned this before, but the idea of composition. So we didn't always exist, right? At some point, we were given a participation in the divine existence. We were given being. So our essence and our being, since there was a time that we didn't exist, those were separate. The essence is what we are, right? What makes me, me, and you. That's our essence. So if my essence didn't always exist, there was a time when I just existed in the mind of God and I didn't actually exist. I didn't have existence of my own out in the world. My own. I mean, it's also participation in his existence. But the point is, his existence and his being are his existence and his essence are identical. And we'll get to this. We're getting ahead of ourselves a little bit, but I want to tease you with this a little bit because it's really wonderful. And to show as well, he's going to continue, like I said, like he did today. He's going to continue to tie it back to Scripture. And one of my favorite verses in Scripture is in the burning bush, when God is asked in the burning bush, who are you? What do I call you? What's your name? And he said, and we talked about this a couple weeks ago, ego eimi, I am that I am, or I am who am. The Greek term that he uses there in the Septuagint, the Greek terms that God uses to describe himself are the exact words that Aristotle uses. Aristotle had no contact with the ancient scriptures, right? He was a pagan. He didn't read the Hebrew text. So beautiful that the very same term and the very rigorous philosophical definition was the exact same. So it's really beautiful. It's really beautiful to see the consistency. So I'm looking forward to this. But a little bit of a shorter reading today. It is going to be a little bit shorter for the next several days. When we look at the next couple chapters are a little bit shorter, like today, but it's wonderful. So there's a question for you guys to ponder, though. How often do I actually reason? That's a good question. That's a good question. And I think as we get further on in here and start to unpack and uncover more truths and ponder more truths together, my experience in this journey, the first time I went through it, was that I realized that I don't reason nearly as much as I thought. And when you do reason and discover truth that you can know, I almost said certifiably know, but you know what I mean. With certitude, you can know with certitude. Once you know something with certitude that you haven't known before, maybe you believed it, but that certitude brings a delight, an intellectual delight that's unmatched. So I'm looking forward to that journey with you guys. Thank you for joining me this morning with Cup of Jonah. I'm not sure what's going on with my screen this morning, but there you have it. So I appreciate you guys joining me. Don't forget, of course, to check out phoneboothpodcast.substack.com. All the wonderful podcasts there, many of which you may agree with or disagree with some of the things that are pondered or discussed. And the point is not for everybody to agree on anything, but to ponder and wrestle with these ideas. So I look forward to tomorrow, where we will discuss, the chapter is called That God is Eternal. And we'll continue with this way of remotion. Have a wonderful rest of your day, folks. See you tomorrow.